listeners, welcome to this podcast for learning English. Today, we will talk about the lives of slaves in the past. My name is Emma.
Hi, I am John. We will share some facts and stories to help you learn English while also learning about history. Let's begin.
Life as a slave in the past was very hard. Slaves were forced to work all day, even when they were tired. They did not have the freedom to rest when they wanted. It was a very unfair system where people were treated like property.
Yes, slaves had no rights. They were not paid for their work and had to follow all the rules of their owners. If they tried to escape, they were punished. Many slaves dreamed of freedom, but for most, it was hard to achieve.
Slaves often worked on farms or plantations. They had to grow crops like cotton and sugar. The work was very hard, and they had to do it in the hot sun. Many slaves became weak and sick because of the difficult conditions.
Slaves lived in small, poor houses called cabins. These cabins were often crowded, and there was very little food. Slaves had to share what little they had with their families. It was a hard life, and they had to be strong to survive.
Families were often separated. Slave owners could sell a mother, father, or child to another owner. This meant families could be taken away from each other, and many never saw their loved ones again. It was very sad and painful.
Even though life was hard, many slaves found ways to stay strong. They sang songs, told stories, and supported each other. These songs and stories helped them keep hope alive, even in the darkest times.
Some slaves tried to escape to find freedom. They followed secret routes called the Underground Railroad. This path helped many slaves run away to the north, where they could live free. It was dangerous, but some were able to find a better life.
People like Harriet Tubman were very brave. She escaped slavery and helped many others escape too. She was a leader of the Underground Railroad, and she never gave up, even when it was very dangerous.
Slavery was legal in the southern part of the United States for many years. However, in the north, many people believed it was wrong. They fought to end slavery and give freedom to all people.
The fight against slavery grew bigger and bigger. Many people joined together to protest. They wanted the government to make a law to stop slavery. It took a long time, but change finally came.
In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was passed. This law ended slavery in the United States. All slaves were set free, and they could start new lives. It was a huge step toward equality.
Even after slavery ended, life was not easy for the former slaves. Many of them did not have money, homes, or jobs. They had to work hard to rebuild their lives and face many challenges.
Some former slaves became sharecroppers. This means they worked on farms and gave part of their crops to the landowner. It was still hard work, but now they could make decisions for themselves and their families.
Education was very important for former slaves. Many of them wanted to learn how to read and write. Schools were built to help them gain the skills they needed for a better future.
Life after slavery was still full of challenges. Many people did not treat former slaves fairly, and there were laws that kept them from having the same rights as others. It was a long struggle for equality.
Even though slavery ended, the fight for civil rights continued for many years. Many brave people stood up for their rights and worked to change the unfair laws that still existed.
Some former slaves became leaders in their communities. They worked hard to make sure their voices were heard. They wanted a better life not only for themselves but also for future generations.
Many former slaves were determined to give their children a better future. They knew education and hard work were the keys to success. They taught their children to never give up and to keep dreaming of a better life.
Today, we look back on slavery as a terrible part of history. It is important to remember the struggles of those who lived through it and honor their strength and courage.
By learning about the past, we can make sure that we never allow such unfairness to happen again. We must work together to build a world where everyone is treated equally.
The lives of slaves in the past were filled with pain and suffering, but they also showed us what true strength looks like. Their bravery continues to inspire people today.
Learning about history is important because it teaches us about right and wrong. By understanding the struggles of the past, we can help create a fairer future for everyone.
Many of the songs and stories from slaves have been passed down through generations. These songs are a way to remember their history and keep their culture alive.
It is amazing to see how much former slaves achieved after gaining their freedom. They built schools, businesses, and communities that are still strong today.
Even though life was difficult, many slaves never gave up hope. They believed in a better future, and their hope helped them survive the darkest times.
The fight for freedom and equality is something that continues today. Many people around the world still face unfair treatment, and it is important to stand up for justice.
Learning English is also a way to help yourself. Just like the slaves who fought for education, learning a new language opens doors to new opportunities.
Yes, learning English can help you communicate with more people, travel to new places, and even find better jobs. It is a skill that can change your life for the better.
Slavery didn't just exist in the U.S., it happened in many parts of the world. People were taken from Africa and sold to work in different countries. Many lost their homes, families, and freedom. It was a sad reality that affected millions of lives. Learning about this history helps us understand why freedom is so important.
In some places, slaves worked in factories, mines, and even as servants. No matter where they worked, the conditions were harsh. The owners only cared about profit, not the well-being of the people. Many slaves were injured or got sick from the hard work, but they had no choice but to keep working.
Despite the terrible conditions, slaves found ways to create a sense of community. They supported each other and built strong relationships with those around them. They shared stories, sang songs, and sometimes held secret meetings to discuss how to escape or resist their owners. This unity gave them strength in hard times.
Slave owners used many cruel methods to control the slaves. They would punish anyone who disobeyed or tried to escape. Some owners even used violence to scare slaves into following the rules. Sadly, these punishments were often very painful and left many slaves with scars, both physically and emotionally.
Even though it was dangerous, some slaves were brave enough to rebel. They would sabotage the tools they used or work slower as a way to resist. Some even started rebellions, fighting back against their owners. Though many of these rebellions were stopped, they showed the slaves' strong desire for freedom.
Children of slaves were born into slavery, too. They didn't have a choice, and their lives were controlled from birth. Many children had to work just as hard as adults, even though they were young. Some were even separated from their parents and sold to different owners. It was a heartbreaking reality for many families.
Religion was also important to many slaves. They found comfort in their faith, and for some, it gave them hope for a better future. Religious gatherings were a way for slaves to come together, pray, and find strength in difficult times. These gatherings also helped slaves stay connected to their culture.
The Civil War in the United States was a major turning point for slavery. Many people fought to end slavery, while others wanted to keep it. The war was long and bloody, but in the end, the side that fought for freedom won. After the war, the U.S. government made it illegal to own slaves, changing the lives of millions of people.
After slavery ended, many former slaves wanted to reunite with their families. They would search for their loved ones, sometimes traveling long distances. It wasn't always easy to find them, but some families were able to come back together. Reuniting with family gave them hope for a new life after the struggles of slavery.
The road to freedom was not just physical, but emotional too. Many former slaves had to heal from the pain they experienced. They carried the memories of their hardships, but they also carried a strong will to overcome. Their resilience shows us how important it is to never give up, no matter the challenge.
Many former slaves became activists for change. They worked hard to make sure others wouldn't face the same struggles they did. They fought for better laws, equal rights, and fair treatment. These activists helped build the foundations of civil rights movements, inspiring future generations to keep pushing for equality.
One of the biggest challenges for former slaves was finding work. Many of them were still poor, and jobs were hard to find. Some returned to working on farms, while others moved to cities to look for new opportunities. Even though it wasn't easy, they kept moving forward, determined to build better lives for themselves and their families.
Slavery didn't just hurt the people who were enslaved, it affected whole communities. People were divided by race, and many held onto prejudices even after slavery ended. These divisions created problems for everyone. It took time, but through education and understanding, people began to work together to heal these wounds.
The stories of former slaves were often passed down from generation to generation. These stories kept their history alive and taught their children important lessons about strength, perseverance, and justice. It's through these stories that we remember the past and learn how to build a better future.
In the years after slavery ended, many former slaves helped create schools for their children. They believed education was the key to a better future. These schools taught reading, writing, and important life skills. Education became a way to break the cycle of poverty and give children a chance at a better life.
Some former slaves also became leaders in politics and business. They worked hard to build new communities and fought for fair laws. Their success showed others that it was possible to rise above the hardships of the past and create a future filled with opportunity and hope.
The legacy of slavery still affects the world today. While we have made great progress, there are still challenges to overcome. By learning about the past, we can make sure that history does not repeat itself. We must continue to work for fairness and equality for all people, no matter their background.
We hope that this podcast has helped you not only learn more about the history of slavery, but also improve your English skills. Remember, learning from the past helps us build a better future. Keep practicing, keep learning, and always stand up for what is right. Thank you for listening.